In January 1943, a sudden and brutal raid by the German FW190 fighter bombers shocked London, unleashing a wave of destruction that caught the city off guard. This surprise attack would test Britain's defences in ways never imagined before. In January 1943, the city of London, still recovering from the constant barrage of the Blitz, found itself facing a new and even more terrifying threat. The night raids, which had been a regular part of the war, were no longer the primary means of attack. The Germans had turned to a tactic that was both shocking and brutal: daylight raids using the FW190 fighter bombers. These aircraft, which had already earned a reputation as a nuisance during tip-and-run raids along Britain's southern coast, were now tasked with a mission of far greater magnitude: to attack the heart of London. The city, accustomed to bombing attacks at night, was not prepared for a strike in the middle of the day. The raid began on the 20th of January, when 28 FW190s took off from northern France, each armed with a 500 kiloliters bomb. These fighters, flying at treetop level, crossed the English Channel at high speed, making it difficult for British radar to detect them in time. The Germans had planned this attack with precision, using the same tactics they had successfully employed in their smaller raids. The aircraft flew under the radar, avoiding detection by British air defence systems. As they approached London, the city's defences, including barrage balloons and anti-aircraft guns, were either caught off guard or not fully operational. The British had no time to prepare for the onslaught. The people of London, going about their day, were unaware that the sky above them was about to be filled with the roar of enemy bombers. The brutality of the raid was immediate. The FW190s, equipped with bombs and cannons, attacked with ruthless efficiency. The German pilots, knowing they had limited time before British fighters could respond, dropped their bombs on carefully chosen targets. Key sites in East London, such as the King George V docks, the West India docks, and the railway complex on the Isle of Dogs, were hit hard. The bombs caused massive explosions, sending shockwaves through the city. Fires ignited all over the area, with smoke billowing into the sky, visible from miles away. The damage was catastrophic. Factories were destroyed, critical infrastructure was damaged, and the civilian population was caught in the middle of it all. The people of London, unprepared for a daytime raid of this scale, were thrown into chaos. The sound of explosions filled the air as buildings crumbled and streets were torn apart. Civilians who were out shopping, children in school, and office workers were all thrown into a state of panic. The destruction was not limited to just buildings. The human cost was immense. The FW190s strafed the streets, firing their machine guns at anything they could see. Pedestrians, cars, and even children caught in the open were gunned down without warning. It was a level of brutality that the people of London had not yet experienced, and it left a deep scar in the city's collective memory. The raid lasted for hours, with the German bombers making repeated runs over the city. As the planes returned to their base in France, the damage was evident. The streets of London were littered with debris, fires still raged, and the death toll continued to rise. The psychological impact on the people of London was profound. This was not just an attack. It was a reminder that the war was far from over and that the German Luftwaffe could strike at any time, with brutal force. It marked the beginning of a new phase in the war, one where surprise daylight raids would become a key tactic in the German air campaign against Britain. The January 1943 raid on London was not just a test of the Germans' bombing capabilities, but a calculated move that leveraged deception to create confusion and maximize the impact of their attack. The Germans knew that Britain's defenses, particularly their radar systems and anti-aircraft units, had become increasingly effective at countering previous threats. This understanding led them to craft a plan that would exploit the element of surprise. The primary tool for this deception was the diversionary tactic employed by the German pilots as part of the raid. Before attacking London, the German bomber formation split into smaller groups. with some of the FW190s tasked with creating a diversion in the coastal town of Maidstone in Kent. These fighters conducted a tip-and-run raid, a tactic that had been effective in smaller, earlier raids on southern British towns. The small group of FW190s that diverted to Maidstone created a false alarm, making British air defences believe that the main attack was centred around this region. The tactical brilliance of this move was that it kept the British off balance, drawing attention away from the real objective, London. This distraction allowed the main formation of FW190s to swoop into London unnoticed until it was too late. By the time the main group of bombers reached East London, the British had already been thrown into disarray. The anti-aircraft defences that were usually set up to protect London were still in the process of being fully mobilised. Thanks to the diversion in Kent, this gave the Germans a critical window of time to strike without facing immediate resistance. The radar stations that could have detected the bombers at long range were unable to respond quickly enough, as the Germans had come in low, staying beneath the radar's detection height. This misdirection and use of a false target provided the perfect cover for the real assault. As the FW190s bombed London with devastating accuracy, the British were caught unprepared for the magnitude of the attack. The Germans had effectively outsmarted the British defences, using their deception to lull them into a false sense of security. The raid was a striking example of how deception could be used not just on the battlefield, but in the strategic planning of aerial warfare. It was a psychological tactic designed to overwhelm the British, who were used to night bombings. With a completely new and unexpected approach, daytime strikes with fighter bombers, the deceptive tactics also created confusion within the British ranks. RAF fighters, which would typically have been deployed to intercept enemy bombers, were not prepared for the swift, low-level assault of the FW190s. The diversionary raids also tricked civilians and local authorities, who had no warning of the scale of the attack. The air raid sirens did not sound, and many were unaware of the imminent danger until it was too late. The result was a higher casualty rate and more damage than the British had anticipated. This sense of helplessness and disorientation among the population further added to the psychological impact of the raid. The use of deception by the Germans showed a level of strategic thinking that had not been fully realized before. While their earlier bombing campaigns were largely about brute force and destruction, the January 1943 raid demonstrated the importance of misdirection and confusion in achieving tactical success. It marked a shift in how the Germans approached their bombing strategy, as they began to realize that psychological warfare, combined with deception, could break the will of a nation just as effectively as sheer military might. This would set the stage for future raids, where the combination of surprise, deception, and brutality would continue to play a key role in their strategy. The success of the January 1943 raid on London was not merely due to the Germans' tactical deception or their ability to catch the British off guard. It was also made possible by the technological superiority that the German Luftwaffe employed in the form of the FW190 fighter bomber. This aircraft, a product of cutting-edge engineering and design, played a pivotal role in changing the dynamics of aerial warfare during World War II. The FW190 was not only fast and maneuverable, but its adaptability in multiple roles, particularly in ground attack missions, set it apart from other aircraft of the time. The FW190 had originally been designed as a fighter aircraft, but its versatility quickly became apparent. By the time of the January raid, the FW190 had already proven itself to be a formidable fighter bomber, capable of taking on bombing runs, while also having the agility to perform hit-and-run attacks on coastal towns. It was a single-seat, single-engine aircraft, which gave it a significant advantage in terms of speed and maneuverability compared to larger bombers. Unlike slower, heavier bombers, the FW190 could fly at low altitudes, stay under radar detection, and avoid the heavy defenses usually found around major cities. This made it an ideal aircraft for such a bold and unconventional raid. The technological features of the FW190 were crucial to its success. Equipped with a powerful BMW 801 engine, the FW190 could reach speeds of over 400 miles per hour, enabling it to fly at treetop level with incredible speed and precision. This made it difficult for British radar to track the incoming aircraft until it was almost too late. The aircraft's heavy armament, which included machine guns and a 500-kilo bomb, made it a potent force on both the ground and in the air. The bomber's ability to carry out bombing raids with these fighter-bomber capabilities meant that they could strike key targets without the need for a larger, slower bomber. This level of versatility and precision was something that the British had not yet anticipated in their air defense strategies. In addition to the FW190's inherent technological advantages, the Germans employed advanced tactics that maximized the plane's potential. The use of low-level bombing tactics was critical in the success of the raid. By flying below the radar's detection range, the FW190s could launch surprise attacks without alerting the British air defenses in advance. This new approach forced the British to rethink their air defense strategies, as their radar systems and anti-aircraft guns were designed to intercept high-flying bombers, not fast-moving fighters. This technological innovation proved to be a game-changer, highlighting the growing importance of low-altitude, high-speed combat in modern warfare. The combination of speed, stealth, and firepower made the FW190 the ideal weapon for carrying out the surprise daylight raid on London. The Germans' use of this aircraft in the role of a fighter bomber was an example of how technological advancements could be leveraged to outmaneuver and overwhelm the enemy. The success of the January raid marked a turning point in the war, demonstrating that technological superiority in the air could decisively impact the outcome of military operations. The use of the FW190, coupled with the Germans' new tactical approach, set the stage for future attacks that would continue to challenge British air defences and test their ability to adapt to rapidly evolving technologies in the field of aerial warfare. As the war progressed, the impact of the FW190's success in London would continue to be felt. It not only altered the course of the immediate battle, but also influenced the development of new aerial tactics and aircraft designs. The raid highlighted how technological innovation could shift the balance of power, forcing the British to refine their defences and approach to warfare. The FW190 fighter bomber remains a symbol of the technological advancements that played a crucial role in shaping the outcome of World War II's air campaigns. The psychological impact of the January 43 FW190 raid on London was immense, both on the civilian population and the British military. In the years leading up to this raid, the people of London had grown accustomed to the daily threat of bombing raids. The Blitz had taught them how to endure airstrikes, how to shelter in underground bunkers, and how to cope with the constant noise of air raid sirens. But what they had never experienced before was a daylight raid of this magnitude, carried out with such precision and speed by the German Luftwaffe. The psychological toll on the population was devastating, as this attack marked a shift from the familiar patterns of night bombing to something entirely new and terrifying. The element of surprise played a crucial role in the psychological impact of the raid. London, accustomed to the fear of nighttime bombings, was not prepared for an assault in broad daylight. The civilians, many of whom were going about their daily routines, had no warning as the FW190s suddenly appeared in the skies. This created a sense of vulnerability and helplessness, as the people were caught off guard by the ferocity and swiftness of the attack. The sound of the bombers approaching at treetop height was deafening, and the ensuing explosions only deepened the sense of chaos and panic. With no air raid alerts, no sirens to signal the incoming attack, the psychological shock was profound. Civilians, who had grown accustomed to the rhythms of wartime life, now had to grapple with the fear that they could be targeted at any moment. With no prior notice, the impact on the British military was also significant. For the Royal Air Force, RAF, and the anti-aircraft defense teams, this raid shattered their sense of control and security. The Germans had outsmarted them by flying low and fast, making it difficult for the RAF to intercept the bombers before they reached their targets. The lack of preparedness exposed a gap in Britain's defences and left the military scrambling to react. It wasn't just a physical defeat, it was a blow to their confidence. The RAF's inability to protect London, despite their advanced radar systems and air defences, created a sense of frustration and self-doubt within the ranks. The raid served as a stark reminder that even the best prepared defense systems could be outmaneuvered by clever tactics and technological advancements. The psychological effects of this raid extended beyond the immediate aftermath. The public's perception of the war began to shift. While previous bombing raids had been seen as part of the ongoing struggle, the daylight attack by the FW190s marked a new level of terror. Civilians began to question their safety as the fear that no place was safe began to take root. The possibility of being struck at any time without warning left many feeling powerless and vulnerable. This erosion of morale would have long-lasting consequences, not just in terms of public sentiment, but also in the effectiveness of the British war effort. The psychological toll of the raid was not confined to the moment of the attack itself. Survivors of the raid, including civilians and soldiers, were left with emotional scars that would haunt them for years to come. The trauma of witnessing the destruction of homes, the deaths of loved ones, and the shock of being caught in an unanticipated attack left an indelible mark on the psyche of the city. Post-traumatic stress would become a common experience for many, as the brutal daylight raid exposed the true vulnerability of the people of London. In the grander context of the war, the psychological impact of the raid on London had broader strategic implications. It was not just about the physical destruction, but about the mental fortitude of the British people and their ability to maintain morale in the face of continuous and unpredictable threats. The Germans, recognizing the power of psychological warfare, had struck at the heart of British resolve, showing that terror and fear could be just as powerful a weapon as bombs and bullets. The January 1943 FW190 raid on London underscored the unpredictability of war and how quickly tactics, technology and enemy strategies could shift. At the heart of this attack was the surprise element. The Germans had adapted to the changing dynamics of aerial combat, and they understood that their conventional bombing tactics were becoming less effective. The German Luftwaffe, faced with growing challenges in the war, particularly on the Eastern Front with the Soviet Union, had been forced to rethink its strategies. Rather than continuing with the same tactics that had worked in the earlier stages of the conflict, they began to innovate, changing the rules of the game. The unpredictability of the attack was evident in the Germans' decision to switch from nighttime raids to daylight bombing, something that had previously seemed unthinkable. The British had prepared for nighttime raids, developing effective defense mechanisms and systems to cope with those attacks. They had grown accustomed to the rhythms of the night bombings, and their defenses had evolved accordingly. But when the Germans launched a daylight raid using the FW190s, the British were caught off guard. The expectation was that the Germans would follow the usual patterns of night raids, but instead they changed their approach entirely. This shift in strategy disrupted the British military's planning and responses, demonstrating how the nature of warfare is constantly in flux. The success of the raid highlighted that no matter how well prepared one side is, they can still be blindsided by the adaptability of the enemy. The attack itself was a perfect example of how the changing dynamics of the war affected the course of the conflict. The German pilots, led by Paul Keller, were not simply dropping bombs. They were executing a precise, well-coordinated operation designed to outmaneuver the British defences. The low-altitude approach taken by the FW190s made it nearly impossible for British radar to detect the incoming raid in time. The bombers, acting in tandem with fighter escorts, were able to bypass the heavy anti-aircraft defences, flying beneath the radar systems and using speed and surprise to their advantage. The outsmarting of the British defences was a testament to the ingenuity of the German military, proving that even well-established defence systems could be outpaced by the unexpected nature of the attack. Moreover, the raid exposed the vulnerability of London's defences and the limitations of the RAF's radar and anti-aircraft systems. The British military had grown overconfident in their ability to handle nighttime bombers and larger raids. However, they were not prepared for a quick, low-level attack, and their defensive measures could not react in time. This vulnerability was a painful lesson for the British, showing that no matter how effective their strategies had been up to that point, they could always be outmaneuvered. The raid served as a reminder that adaptability and innovation were just as important as sheer force in the outcome of aerial warfare. The unpredictability of the raid also affected the morale of both the British civilians and military. While the Blitz had taught the people of London how to endure the hardships of bombing, the daylight raid brought a new element of fear. The unpredictability of the attack, the fact that the Germans could strike at any time, left many civilians questioning their safety. The British military, on the other hand, was left to reconsider their approach to air defence and adapt their strategies to meet the changing nature of the German tactics. The raid emphasized that no matter how prepared a nation might be, the chaos of war could change the course of events in an instant. In essence, the January 1943 FW190 raid was a clear example of how the unpredictability of war forces military leaders to constantly adapt and rethink their strategies. The Germans demonstrated how effective it could be to change tactics when one approach becomes predictable, and the British were forced to confront the reality that they could no longer rely on old methods to defend themselves. The raid shook the British military and the people of London, showing that the very nature of war is constantly evolving, with no one ever truly safe from the next unexpected attack. The January 1943 FW190 raid on London marked a critical point in the air war, not just in terms of the destruction caused, but in how it represented a shift in the balance of power between Britain and Germany. This raid was the culmination of German adaptation, where they turned their tactics and technology towards exploiting weaknesses in British defences. It wasn't just a random attack, but a calculated strike that showed the Germans could still inflict significant damage on Britain, even as the war was turning in favour of the Allies. The psychological and material impact of the raid demonstrated that the Germans had learned from their earlier mistakes and were now shaping the battlefield in their favour. The use of the FW190 in a daylight raid was a deliberate decision to overcome the growing technological superiority of British defences. Throughout the earlier stages of the war, the British had developed a formidable defence system against nighttime bombings. The radar systems, the barrage balloons, and the anti-aircraft guns had become increasingly effective at detecting and intercepting German bombers. The British had assumed that their defences were almost impenetrable, but the Germans found a way to bypass these defences using stealth and speed. The FW190, with its high-speed capability and low-flying tactics, was the ideal aircraft for such a mission. It was fast enough to outrun British fighter interceptors and could fly low enough to avoid radar detection, making it a perfect weapon for this precision attack. This raid revealed a vulnerability in the British defences that the Germans could exploit at will. The psychological blow of the raid went beyond just the destruction caused. It reminded the British of the precariousness of their situation. Despite their technological advancements and their effective defense measures, the British realized they were still vulnerable to new tactics and innovations in air combat. The raid on London showed the resilience of the Luftwaffe and the incredible adaptability of German tactics. The Germans had managed to turn the tables by exploiting a gap in the British defenses and executing a devastating attack. This sent a message to the British military and public alike that the war was far from over, and they could not afford to relax in the face of new, unforeseen threats. The shift in the balance of power was not just about the physical destruction that the raid caused, but about how it influenced the course of the war. In the immediate aftermath, the British military was forced to rethink its approach to air defense. The effectiveness of the German FW190 raids made it clear that the British had to adapt quickly to the changing nature of warfare. The Germans had shown that their fighter bombers, combined with their innovative strategies, could still achieve success, despite the technological edge the British had developed. This prompted the RAF and other defense organizations to reassess their tactics and make adjustments to combat these new threats. The Germans, on the other hand, were not able to sustain the momentum from this raid. The cost of these tactics, in terms of aircraft lost and the demands placed on the Luftwaffe, became clear after the attack. The limited resources of the German Air Force meant that these high-risk raids could not be repeated on a regular basis. Despite the psychological victory of the January 1943 raid, it was a short-lived advantage for Germany. As the war progressed, the Allies gained greater control of the skies and the airfields, making it increasingly difficult for the Germans to maintain such attacks. Nevertheless, the raid left a lasting impact on both sides, demonstrating how a shift in tactics could create a temporary advantage that, if used effectively, could alter the course of the war. Ultimately, the raid was not just an attack on London. It was a strategic move that showed the evolving nature of air warfare. It demonstrated the importance of innovation in the face of an ever-changing battlefield. While the balance of power may have tilted temporarily in Germany's favor, the British ability to adapt and the growing strength of Allied air forces would eventually tip the scales back in favor of the Allies. The raid was a reminder that in war, nothing is ever settled permanently, and the ability to outsmart the enemy through innovation and adaptability is just as crucial as raw military might. The January 1943 FW190 raid on London not only left a profound impact on British defences, but also underscored the concept of vengeance and the constant adaptability of warfare. For the Germans, this raid was not just a military operation. It was a calculated attempt to retaliate for Britain's bombing of Berlin. On January 16, 1943, the RAF had struck Berlin for the first time since November 1941. This marked a significant moment, as Britain had shifted from defensive retaliations to actively taking the fight to Germany's capital. The Germans, seeking to exact revenge, planned a precision attack on London. This raid was, therefore, more than a military campaign. It was a response to provocation, one that aimed to demonstrate to Britain that the Germans could retaliate in kind. The strategic shift to daylight raids was a form of adaptation that came out of necessity. The Luftwaffe, knowing the British had become adept at defending against night bombing raids, realized that conventional bombing strategies would no longer suffice. The Germans had to rethink their approach to striking Britain. The FW190's low-level, fast-moving tactics represented a dramatic departure from the usual bombing campaigns, highlighting the innovative flexibility that had become crucial in modern warfare. The ability to adjust strategies quickly in response to changing circumstances was an essential component of this raid's success. The Germans had learned that daylight attacks, while risky, could outmaneuver the British air defences and catch them off guard. Moreover, the raid exemplified the vengeful nature of the war. The desire for retribution played a pivotal role in shaping military decisions. Just as the Germans had retaliated for the British raids over Berlin, this mentality of vengeance was perpetuated on both sides. The idea of bombing as a form of vengeance wasn't just about destroying military targets. It was about sending a psychological message. For the Germans, the attack on London was an attempt to break British morale by demonstrating their ability to strike at the heart of the British capital, showing that Britain was no longer safe from the air at any time of day. For Britain, on the other hand, the bombing of Berlin had been symbolic of their resolve to fight back, showing that they could reach into the heart of enemy territory and exact a form of vengeance of their own. The adaptability of the Germans in the face of changing warfare tactics was not just limited to the use of the FW190, but also included their strategic responses to Britain's air defense systems. While the British had developed sophisticated anti-aircraft and radar systems to detect high-altitude bombers, the Germans adapted their technology to counteract these advancements. By utilizing low-level attacks with fighter bombers, the Germans could avoid radar detection and minimize the effectiveness of British air defense strategies. This adaptability wasn't just in terms of tactics, but also in terms of technological innovation. The German Air Force continually evolved, refining their strategies and aircraft to meet the challenges presented by Britain's increasingly effective defenses. The psychological impact of the raid on London was intensified by the Germans' ability to outmaneuver Britain's defenses. The vengeful strike, coming in broad daylight, shattered the perception that London was invulnerable. The civilians and military alike were caught off guard, highlighting the fragility of British security. This sense of vulnerability was compounded by the unpredictability of warfare, where the rules were constantly changing and no one could be sure of what tactics the enemy might employ next. For Britain, it was a sobering reminder that no defense system, no matter how well established, was invincible. It was a wake-up call that the German Luftwaffe was capable of adjusting its tactics quickly and with devastating effectiveness. Ultimately, the vengeance felt by the Germans in the wake of the RAF bombing of Berlin set the stage for a new chapter in aerial warfare. The adaptability displayed by the Germans during the January 1943 raid was a powerful reminder of how flexible and innovative thinking in warfare could yield results, even when facing overwhelming odds. However, this tactical success was short-lived, as the Germans could not maintain such high-risk raids on a consistent basis. The raid on London, while a temporary victory, also showcased how the course of war can shift in an instant, depending on how quickly adversaries can adapt to one another's strategies and technology. The January 1943 FW190 raid on London was a pivotal moment in the evolution of aerial warfare, marked by its suddenness, innovation, and devastating psychological impact. It was a perfect illustration of how war is not simply about brute force, but about adaptation, surprise, and psychological manipulation. For the Germans, it was an attempt to regain control over the skies and send a message of vengeance after the RAF's bombing of Berlin. By employing the FW190 fighter bomber, they had exploited a gap in British defences, showing that even the most sophisticated air defence systems could be outsmarted through technological superiority and innovative tactics. However, the raid's impact was not just felt in the immediate destruction it caused, but in its long-term consequences. For Britain, the attack revealed the vulnerabilities in their defences and underscored the need for constant adaptation. The British public and military were left to grapple with the realization that their city was no longer secure, even during the daytime, as psychological scars from this attack lingered. The raid also forced a rethinking of Britain's air defence strategy, leading to changes in how they would approach future threats. The success of the Germans in catching London off guard exposed a critical weakness and drove the British to innovate further, refining their systems and strategies to better cope with future attacks. For the Germans, the raid was both a short-term success and a long-term setback. Despite the technological advantages and the strategic brilliance behind the daylight raid, the Luftwaffe's resources were overstretched. The raid marked a high point in their tactical innovation, but it was also a sign that they could not sustain such attacks indefinitely. The cost in aircraft losses, coupled with the demands of fighting on multiple fronts, meant that the Germans would struggle to replicate the success of this raid. Despite this, the psychological victory they achieved by attacking London during the day, a city previously thought to be invulnerable, would resonate as one of the most significant moments in the war. In the grand scope of the war, the raid foreshadowed the future of warfare, where adaptability, deception, and technological advancements would play a decisive role. The lessons learned from this raid, particularly the importance of surprise and the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, would continue to shape the strategies of both the Allies and the Axis in the years to come. The FW190's role in the raid would go down in history as a key moment in the air superiority battle, influencing future air combat strategies. Ultimately, the January 1943 raid showed how unexpected tactics and technological advancements could alter the course of the war, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. It was a reminder that in warfare nothing is certain, and the ability to adapt, innovate, and surprise the enemy can shift the balance of power. The raid on London was not just a moment of destruction, it was a moment of strategic innovation, one that would influence how aerial combat would be conducted in the future. And while the Germans may have achieved a temporary victory, the raid underscored the unpredictability of war and the relentless push for adaptation and survival that would define the remainder of the conflict.